Sega is a developer that doesn't need any introduction. From franchises like Sonic the Hedgehog to Like a Dragon and Persona, Sega has had a presence in the game industry from the moment they entered it. Starting in 2017, in an effort to preserve their legacy of content on an accessible device, Sega launched Sega Forever for iOS and Android. From 2017 to 2023, Sega released 30 different titles under the initiative, re-releasing games from a variety of Sega platforms, including Genesis and Dreamcast. Although a large chunk of these ports have been delisted over time, I thought it'd be fun to go through and review all of the remaining games on the Google Play Store and see if Sega was successful in preserving their legacy. Let's get started. I mean, what can I say about Sonic 1 that hasn't already been said? Of course this was going to be on the list. If Sega tried to do a legacy campaign and not include Sonic, I would be concerned. I will say this port is amazing. I know this is where Christian Whitehead got his start with Sega, and it's very clear that he knows what he's doing. I've never been a big fan of touchscreen controls for games like this, but honestly it felt very natural here. The biggest thing I can say overall, though, is just how gorgeous the game is. I would argue that the Android port looks better on my phone screen than the Origins port did on PS5. On a bad side, though, is the ads. I'm going to mention this here because this is the first one. All of these games are free to play, but if you choose the free option, there are ads. I didn't think it would be that bad, but at least here in Sonic, there is an ad after every single act and every single time that you die. This is insufferable, and I hope it's not that bad in the rest that I play. I will mention in the individual games if it's better or for worse, but just assume that all of them have ad issues. Beyond that though, if you're willing to pay the $1.99 to get rid of ads, this is one of the better ports of the original game you can get. I don't know a whole ton about Virtua Tennis as a franchise, but I can tell you that I've never been very good at a single tennis game I've ever played, and this one is no exception. I somehow managed to not score a single point the entire time I played, and that for sure is a skill issue. Regardless of my ability, I thought this was a pretty good game. The graphics while playing were impressive, although clearly the UI and menus were made for phones from a couple years ago, because on my fairly modern phone, all of them were super stretched out. I'm also impressed by how much content there is in this game. There are a ton of different modes and tournaments to play, in that you can definitely get some good mileage out of this one. On the ads front, this was slightly better than Sonic. There was still an ad after every set, but at the very least, each set lasted a bit longer, so it didn't feel nearly as intrusive. This one definitely is a tad outdated hardware-wise, but still an impressive game. I played a good amount of Golden Axe at the barcade that had a Genesis set up years ago, so I was happy to see that this game was on the list. This is the first game to fully use the Sega Forever branding, and it shows in the overall presentation. This is a surprisingly good port, and I had a ton of fun playing it. There's a tiny bit of screen crunch, which for me caused some depth perception issues, but once you play on a little more, this becomes a non-issue. The ads aren't even that bad either. Really, you only have to watch one when you launch the game, and anytime you want to save. Although interestingly, I don't know if it was just me, but the save feature did not seem to work. I watched the ad, and then once the ad is over, the saving box just spins and doesn't go away until I close the app. This made all of the Golden Axe games coming up frustrating, although thankfully, these games are short. Besides that, Golden Axe as a game has aged well in my opinion, and it's really cool to have it in your pocket at all times. Along with Golden Axe 2 plays almost exactly like the first game with some extra added cutscenes between stages and some more complex sprite art. Games like the Golden Axe franchise were perfect for mobile, something as simple as beat-em-ups that only use a few buttons and don't require anything terribly precise to accomplish the goal. There isn't a ton I can say about Golden Axe 2 since it felt incredibly similar to the first game, so everything I have to say about it applies to this one. It's funny that they managed to get 3 games out of the Genesis that are the exact same as each other with minor improvements. Just based on complexity alone, I'd say this was my favorite one out of the 3. The sprite work looks even better. There are also cutscenes between stages like 2, except now, they also show you where you are on the map of the world, which I thought was a nice touch. The biggest difference I felt here was that I felt a lot harder out of the gate. I understand that difficulty comes with the times, but this was the first one of the 3 I actually found myself having some difficulty with, particularly because there's a lot more enemies, and they have shields now, that require a little bit more strategy. This whole app is a great value, even if you have to fight through some ads. You can't beat getting 3 solid beat-em-up Genesis games for free. Out of all the games that were ported for this initiative, I was the most excited for Crazy Taxi. I'm an enormous fan of this franchise, both the original arcade machine and the PS2 copy of the game I had growing up. Not to mention the various games inspired by it, namely Simpsons Road Rage. So, hearing that there's a version of this game that I can have in my pocket at all times, I was really hoping it'd be good. Thankfully, I was not let down. This plays exactly as it should, and even features all of the modes you would expect. The graphics look great for a phone port, and the physics of the car felt on par with my experience playing on PS2 and the arcade cabinet. The biggest plus that I cannot believe is here is the original Offspring soundtrack. I know that licensing always ruins a lot of different soundtracks, so I was expecting that this game would replace the Offspring with some generic music. But when I booted up arcade mode and heard the song start, I knew this was going to be great. If it's any indication how much I love this game, this was one of the only apps of the video I decided to pay the $1.99 to get ad-free because I will absolutely be playing an embarrassing amount of this game. Just like Sonic 1, this is Sonic 2 in all of its amazing glory. This really is such a good game, and having a competent mobile port is always a plus. Once again, this is a Christian Whitehead project, and you can tell. Everything is buttery smooth, and the controls work really well for being on a touchscreen joystick. Not to mention, just like Sonic 1, this game looks stunning, and it's amazing how well an 18-bit Sonic game still looks on modern platforms. Really shows why this game is so timeless. If you want to play Sonic 2, this is one of the most definitive ways you can, at least as long as you're willing to cough up the $2 to get rid of ads. Which, based on the price of Sonic 2 in other places, that's a steal for such a good port of the game. This is another one of Sega's properties that I've never played before. I had heard of it, of course, but this is actually my first experience playing the franchise myself. It hooked me instantly. I mentioned in the Golden Axe section that I love beat-em-ups, and this one is a very smooth one. As is the case with a lot of other games on this list, Streets of Rage has aged incredibly well and still holds up as a fun and playable experience. Once again, this game looks great on the port, and the controls are way more fluid than I would have expected. I am confused why this app was not arranged like Golden Axe, where all 3 of the games are bundled in one app. Only the first game is included here, although Streets of Rage 2 was part of the program and is still available to download, which we'll get to later. I'm curious why they didn't bother to put the 2 together in one app. Regardless, I'm very happy with my time played, and I'm excited for Streets of Rage 2 later in the video. Out of all the Whitehead ports, this one is the most important one. Aside from a few releases here and there, Sonic CD is one of the games that Sega forgets about a lot. So to have such an amazing version of it that's so easily accessible is great. The one part that I felt was a little worse from the other ports was the movement controller. In the other ports, it was a joystick that moved in 8 directions and was able to do 360. In this one, the joystick is replaced with a D-pad stand-in that only does 4 directions and requires a little bit more precision of a press to move a certain direction. It doesn't make a huge difference in the overall gameplay, but it was just something to get used to. The other new addition to this port was the fact that if you want to avoid a game over, you can watch an ad to continue, which is kinda cool. This is the easiest and best way to play Sonic CD. Fans of the channel will know just how much I love the Super Monkey Ball franchise. With how many weird and wacky gimmicks this series has tried over the years, it only makes sense that motion controls on a phone would happen eventually. I had a pretty good time with this game. It was very good looking, although compared to some of the other games on this list, it wasn't the smoothest. I do have to give them credit though, keeping in mind when this game originally came out. The controls were pretty good. I do wish that there was some kind of ability to calibrate it, because I found very quickly that the calibration fell off. Otherwise, when it worked well. Some of the levels were well made, but I could tell it was simplified to fit the format that this game was on. The biggest thing I absolutely hated was that every single time you finish a level, an ad plays. When Monkey Ball levels are no more than 60 seconds, you spend more time watching ads than playing the actual game. This one is worth playing, only if you're willing to spend the extra money to get rid of the ads. Otherwise, it's not worth it for free. I'm obviously going to do a deeper video on this game during Sonic Saturday in due time, but I can't talk about the remaining Sega Forever apps without covering this port. I knew how bad this game is regarded going into it, so I didn't know what I was going to feel about it, especially playing on mobile instead of PC. This isn't the worst thing I've ever played. I'm not saying it's good, but I'm saying that I didn't have the worst time. There are some cool things. I liked that Sonic could run over the water if you picked up enough speed, and I liked having a button that made it easy to have Tails grab you. The zone design wasn't the worst, but it was pretty barren level design overall. As I know plenty of people have said, this game looks unfinished. You can definitely skip this one. This game was just as great as the first one was, and now I feel like I have to sink more time into this franchise. The sprite work is great, and the attacks felt a lot more powerful and varied, and the stages were a lot longer with more interesting and detailed backgrounds to power through. The one thing I did notice between this one and the first one was the enemies were a lot easier. They didn't attack as frequently, and when they did, they took less health. I wonder if this was to make it more single-player friendly, as I know a lot of beat-em-ups scale enemy difficulty with the expectations that you have a player too, making it increasingly difficult if you try to play the game by yourself. Regardless of the reason, it made it a lot more fun to play, because it felt a lot more fair. I also didn't notice that the ads were too intrusive, although just like Golden Axe, the save system does not work. I'm going to be honest on two fronts here. I was at least familiar with Streets of Rage and Golden Axe before making the video, but I did not have a single idea what Shining Force was. The other honest bit is that I'm really not a fan of this era of JRPGs, or really JRPGs in general. With those two things in mind, I will be out front and say I did not spend nearly any actual time with this game. Right off the bat, I found the controls to be very hard because the game is on a grid, but precise movements with the fake D-pad make it super frustrating. Not to mention, as soon as the game starts, it's already throwing piles of fantasy garble at you before you've even truly started. I can handle weird fantasy worlds and terms, but this just felt like too much. This is entirely a personal opinion though. I'm sure the game is great. I will also share this sentiment with our next two games. I have pretty much exactly the same thing to say about this game than the one before it. Although I will say the sprites are very pretty and a very big upgrade. I also liked how the opening was done, with the retrieval of the crystals. Beyond that, I do not feel equipped to review these more, but I wanted to make sure I included them since they are part of this initiative. Out of the three, this one was the prettiest of them. It felt very much like a PC game, and the way that the character was controlled got rid of the problem I had with the fake D-pad. I liked the labyrinth, since it reminded me of that one Windows screensaver. I think out of these three, I could get the most out of this one, although my aversion for non-Pokemon turn-based battling would prevent me from having a ton of fun. On a side note, I thought it was a lot of fun that the dwarf from Golden Axe was a weapons dealer. It's a cool Easter egg. This was quite the journey. One of the first things I noticed while going through this was not only how many games there were still available, but how much of a variety they gave from platforming to RPGs to racing. I think the idea of wanting to put all of the old Sega games on a more accessible device for free is a noble one, but I will counterpoint that with the fact that Sega has never stopped porting these games, and there are much better versions of them on various other platforms that not only give you an actual controller, but also give you an ad-free experience. Still though, I appreciate the sentiment and wish that other companies would think like this. I think the highlight for me was Streets of Rage 1 and 2, as they were new experiences for me, and it may be a series I look further into now. I don't like how Sega has delisted a bunch of these, but I can understand that nothing can last forever, especially with even more modern ways of playing, such as the Genesis NSO emulator. Here's a list of all of the games that are no longer available and are no longer on this service. Phantasy Star 2, Comic Zone, Kid Chameleon, Altered Beast, The Revenge of Shinobi, Rystar, Space Harrier 2, Beyond Oasis, Decap Attack, eSWAT City Under Siege, Gunstar Hero, Dynamite Headdy, Vector Man, Phantasy Star 3, Phantasy Star 4, and Afterburner Climax. What did you think of Sega Forever? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe while you're down there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.